So who actually owns a virtual world? Is it the company that writes all the code and builds the thing? Or is it the people who live there, the community that calls it home? Well, we're going to dig into that exact question, and we'll do it by looking at copyright law, digital communities, and this one really surprising piece of old hardware.
You know, to most of us, this just looks like a decommissioned server blade from the game World of Warcraft, basically a piece of industrial junk. But for these players, this is a relic. This is the actual physical heart of their virtual home, and it's covered in the signatures of friends who shared who knows how many adventures in a world that only existed on this very machine.
That simple statement, "That was our server," it gets right to the core of this massive conflict. See, when these players say "our," they're not talking about legal ownership, right? They're talking about a place that's filled with their history, their community, their memories. But in the eyes of the law, that feeling means absolutely nothing. So what we have here are two totally competing views of what a server really is. Is it just corporate property, or can it actually become a community's home? And the answer to that really depends on who you ask. And here are those two realities laid out side by side. On one hand, for the corporation, a server is just an asset. It's a piece of hardware in a data center governed by really strict terms of service. But for the user, it's a living world. It's like a digital hometown with its own culture and its own history. And this isn't just some philosophical disagreement. Oh no. This clash led to one of the most jaw-dropping lawsuits in the history of gaming. So let's see what happens when this idea of a server as a community home runs headfirst into the brick wall of federal copyright law.
Back in 2009, the game developer Blizzard Entertainment sued a private server operation called Scape Gaming. Now, this wasn't just some tiny fan project. This was a full-on business that had essentially reverse-engineered Blizzard's world. And it was making real money, over $3 million in revenue. For Blizzard, this was a super clear-cut case of copyright infringement. The court didn't just agree. It decided to send a message. But the final penalty wasn't just about the money that Scape Gaming had actually made. It was about sending a message so loud and clear that everyone would hear it. The judge ordered Scape Gaming to pay over $88 million. It's a number so huge, it almost feels fake. I mean, where does a figure like that even come from? Well, it wasn't just pulled out of thin air. It was the result of a very specific, and some might even say brutal, legal calculation. Just look at this breakdown. That $3 million in profits Scape Gaming actually made, that's barely 3% of the total fine. Almost all of it, a whopping 96%, comes from something called statutory damages. And understanding how they got to that $85 million number, well, that reveals everything about this story. Okay, so let's get into the legal math, because this is the part where the very community that lived in this virtual world becomes its single greatest liability. So here's the crucial point. The court didn't base the damages on Blizzard's lost sales or even Scape Gaming's profits. No. Instead, they counted every single person who had an account on that private server. Each one of those 427,000 users was legally considered an individual act of circumvention of copyright. And the law specifies a minimum fine of $200 per act. So, you multiply the number of people by the minimum penalty, and boom, $85.4 million. The community itself was literally weaponized by the math of the law. And get this. Even the judge who handed down the sentence, Stephen V. Wilson, he pretty much admitted in his ruling how huge, how unreasonably large this number was. But he said his hands were tied. The law, as written by Congress, demanded this exact approach. It transformed a community's population into a catastrophic financial penalty.
And with that signature, a really powerful precedent was set. A virtual world, no matter how much life or community you pour into it, is first and foremost the absolute property of its creator. The law doesn't see users as inhabitants, it sees them as potential violations.
So, after hearing all that, with this monumental legal risk, why on earth would anyone even create or play on a private server in the first place? Well, the answer often has way less to do with piracy and a lot more to do with preservation.
A lot of the time, these servers aren't trying to rip off the current game. They're more like digital museums. They're trying to preserve older versions that the company itself has just abandoned. It's almost an act of digital archaeology, driven by this deep desire to visit a world that no longer officially exists.
You see, online worlds are never static. They're always being updated, patched, expanded. Whole continents can change, old quests vanish forever, the very rules of the world get rewritten. So for players who fell in love with an older version, that world is just gone.
erased by progress, and these private servers become the only way to visit the ghosts of these lost worlds, to walk through a digital home that the landlord has since torn down.
And that brings us full circle, right back to that server blade covered in signatures and the central conflict we started with.
And this just perfectly illustrates the two realities we've been talking about. On the left, you've got a server that's a sacred object, a focal point for community and memory. And on the right, it's just another component in a massive, faceless, tightly controlled corporate machine. It's a home versus an asset. It's a place versus property.
That $88 million judgment gives us the law's very clear, very expensive answer. But as more of our lives, our friendships, and our memories are built inside these corporate-owned spaces, it's a question that just feels more and more urgent. Who really owns a place? The one who built the house, or the ones who made it a home?